Butterflies and bees are fun to watch, but did you ever wonder how butterflies and bees survive and reproduce? Have you ever thought about what the planet would be like without them? There are more than 1 million species of insects, which is over half of all known extant species on our planet. Insects have a huge amount of biomass and are often hugely prolific animals. They're extremely important to the planet ecologically and to we humans economically. So in this lecture, we'll explore adaptations of some of the most important animals on our planet, invertebrates from terrestrial ecosystems. In one of the most fun examples of these tiny creatures informing how we humans live, zoologists researching ant colonies have developed a swarm intelligence theory called ant colony optimization to highlight the tiny ant as a model for social engineering of human accomplishments. There are over 12,000 species of ants within the world's diversity of all animal species, and ants are important for ecological processes and for our understanding of the basics of social biology. The teamwork we see in ants is decentralized to individuals, and individually, the ants appear primitive. But collectively, ants drive colony behavior that results in efficient solutions to complex problems, like directing all individuals from a large colony to a single picnic basket or some other single food source. Ant trails, which are reinforced by chemical attractants called pheromones, become efficient routing systems for the ant social group based on behavior of many individuals. Dr. Marco Dorigo, a researcher in the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory of the Free University of Brussels in Belgium, developed an ant colony optimization algorithm from his analyses of the seemingly simple ant during his doctoral dissertation. This algorithm focused on the behavior of just a single species of ant. And virtual ants working the algorithm in different applications now inform everything from advances in data routing in computing systems to airplane arrivals. At Southwest Airways, a swarm intelligence software program based on ant behavior is used to efficiently assign aircraft arrivals to different gates and even to evaluate different boarding methods for passengers. For gate assignments, each pilot now acts like an individual ant, each searching for his, her, or her own best gate. Each pilot learns from their experience what the best gate is, and it turns out that these gates are best for the whole airline. The result is that the colony of Southwest pilots can most often go to gates they can arrive at and depart from most quickly. So, one of the things we can learn from the many other species that share our planet is the set of rules of efficient swarm behavior developed through millions of years of evolution. And we can make similar rules applicable to our human behavior in modern times. That's some futuristic stuff. But insects are old. They've been around for 400 million years, according to the fossil record, and we can clearly learn from the behavioral rules that have shaped their evolution. Here is something else that entomologists have said for decades. There is one simple truth, and that is that we humans cannot live without the Earth's many insect pollinators. Among the 1 million species of insects, there are lots of pollinators. Pollination is an essential function for plant life, not just a great natural history story. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther or male flower parts to the stigma, the female part of the flower. The goal of live plants is to reproduce, of course. And successful pollination allows plants to produce seeds that carry the species legacy through the next generations. Without animal pollinators, Earth's flowering plants and ecosystems would not survive. Humans would struggle more to survive because pollinators are necessary to produce our diversity of food crops. About 1/3 of the foods we eat rely to some extent on bees. All vegetables and fruits, including almonds, tomatoes, broccoli, runner beans, apples, blueberries, peaches, oranges, and lots of other crops, rely on bees. Economists estimate that the economic value of bees pollinating activities in the US is about $15 billion per year. We know that honeybees and thousands of other species of bees pollinate fruit plants. But did you know that large and often clumsy beetles pollinate large flowers like magnolia flowers? And do you like to eat figs? There are over 900 species of figs, all pollinated by small fig wasps. Yes, butterflies, beetles, flies, ants, and even wasps act as pollinators. Some flowers open at night and are pollinated by moths. Plants attract animal pollinators by offering food in the form of sugary nectar or protein-rich pollen from flowers, and in this way achieve active transfer of their genetic material to the next generation. Of course, sometimes it takes more than just food to attract pollinators. Anyone who has visited a garden knows that flowering plants have a diversity of flower shapes, colors, scents, and even structure, an amount of nectar per flower. Flowers vary based on the type of pollinators they have, and such coevolution of shape, scent, and color allows the plant and animal to more successfully interact. These characteristics are so well known to biologists as group traits that they can be used to predict the type of pollinator that will visit and aid the flower in successful reproduction. One orchid, the white Darwin's orchid, has such a long nectary, almost 12 inches in length, that in 1862, Darwin predicted that this orchid would be pollinated at night by a moth with a specialized, very long proboscis. Indeed, such a long-tongued moth was discovered in Madagascar in 1903 and then actually filmed in action only recently. Such co-evolved relationships between flowering plants and insects are part of the reason for the great diversity we now see in each group. So, back to bees. There are 20,000 species of bees, including honeybees, out of hundreds of thousands of species of pollinators. This diversity suggests that we need to provide a diversity of flowering plants so the little creatures can thrive. The bee life cycle begins, of course, with reproduction. Sexual reproduction is the norm for insects, and honeybees, the best known bee pollinators, are no different. During a mating flight, the virgin queen bee may mate with many males. The male inserts his endophallus into the queen during her one and only mating flight, discharges his sperm, and leaves his endophallus behind in her as he withdraws. This rips his abdomen open and males die after mating. Once a queen is mated, she stores over 5 million sperm and may lay more than 1 million eggs in her lifetime. The queen forms a new colony during the winter season by laying eggs in individual cells within a honeycomb structure made of beeswax. The queen can choose to fertilize or not fertilize an egg as it moves through her oviduct. Fertilized eggs all become female worker bees, while unfertilized eggs become drones or male bees. The worker bees can also lay eggs, but they are unfertilized, so the insect that emerges is a drone. Each egg is about half the size of a grain of rice, and a honeybee queen can lay about 2,000 eggs in a day. The larva spends 3 days developing nervous and digestive systems, as well as its outer body covering, before hatching. At this stage of development, the larvae have no antennae, no legs, wings, or compound eyes, only simple eyes. Worker bees feed the larvae with either honey or royal jelly, a substance made of pollen and glandular excretions from worker bees, until the larvae's adult development into workers, queens, or drones is complete. The whole process takes about a week. As an interesting note, it seems that if the larvae are nutritionally stressed during this growth period, they will be poor foragers as adults. When the queen can no longer lay eggs, a new queen will emerge to take her place. In honeybees, the larvae that receive the royal jelly from the workers are the ones that can become queens. In addition to all these duties nurturing larvae, workers also collect pollen. Honeybees have leg structures that are adaptive for pollen gathering and other activities. Their forelegs have toothed indentations covered with a velum, a membranous structure that closes the indentation, which acts as an antenna cleaner. There's a spur on the middle legs, which removes wax from the wax glands on the bee's abdomen. There are also pollen brushes on these front and middle legs, which clean off pollen particles picked up on the bee's body hairs. And these particles are then deposited on the pollen hairs of the hind legs. Finally, the long hairs of the pollen combs on the hind legs remove pollen from the comb of the opposite leg. Then the specialized pollen packer, also called the auricle, presses it into the leg's pollen basket, also called a corbicula, when the leg is flexed back. Each bee carries her pollen back to the hive, where it is pushed into a waxy cell within the comb. Other workers care for the pollen in the hive. It is the primary source of protein for the bees in the hive, and some forms are called bee bread. The pollen is needed in the first 5 to 6 days of a worker bee's life to allow these creatures to secrete wax later in life, apparently because they need protein early in life for adequate fat cell development. The workers that work on secreting wax gorge themselves on honey beforehand and hang in groups near the area where comb is being built through the wax synthesis process. Of course, honey that is so valuable for humans is collected as nectar by the bees. Then the sugary substance is placed in the waxy cells of the honeycomb, where its water evaporates as the open cells are fanned by the bees' wing movements. How far do bees travel in their quest for pollen and nectar? Although the recorded champion is a honeybee that scientists tracked for about 10 kilometers, most bees prefer to fly only tens or hundreds of yards. This is important because, as I said, 1/3 of our food crop depends on bees, yet bee species and numbers have been declining. Over the past 2 centuries, millions of acres of old fields with diverse flowering plants have changed either to millions of acres of houses with monocultures of grass in the suburbs, or to millions of monocultures of food crops. It's simply more difficult for bees to find the close-in food they've evolved to find. This complex of factors has contributed to the phenomenon known as colony collapse disorder. Colony collapse disorder was first detected in 2006 in the US. Colony collapse happens when worker bees abandon their hives in large numbers, with the result that colonies cannot sustain themselves. Research shows 3 major factors that contribute to colony collapse disorder. 1, arrival of some stressful disease, specifically the nasty parasitic bee-specific Varroa mite, along with the so-called Israeli acute paralysis virus that is transmitted by Varroa mites. 2, stressors in the environment, including pesticides and other pollutants. And 3, reduction in habitat and local plant diversity. Among the many pollinators, honeybees naturally tend toward a more generalist diet and love diversity of plant food sources. Yet, when we use bees commercially, we put millions of bees in a monoculture that is anything but generalist. And honeybees aren't the only bees that have been hit by ecological pressures. The big fur coat that bumblebee pollinators have evolved to help them be active in cool weather. may make them too hot in the warmer weather caused by climate change. And this may be a short or long-term problem. There are, at the very least, clear short-term impacts on bumblebees. Bumblebees are declining quickly, and some have gone extinct. A U.S. West Coast bumblebee species called Franklin's bumblebee may now be gone forever. Pesticides may also be part of the problem, but they aren't the entire problem. And disease also affects bumblebees, just like it does honeybees. So, we pay an ecological price in reduced pollinators when we increase human activities like building of suburbs, monoculture farming to produce more corn and soy, and use of pesticides for convenience. One thing individuals can do to offset a little bit of these impacts is use their own backyards to grow pesticide-free pollinator gardens by planting native plants, or allow ground nesting bees to nest in the backyard. Another way to help bees is to leave dead limbs on trees if you can. They're good for pollinating bees' nesting sites. And it's not just individuals who can help. Universities have gotten in on the act. Universities participating in the Bee Campus USA program create pollinator-friendly habitats suitable for one or more species of local native bees. As a bonus, these programs can become part of a university's service learning curriculum, so everybody wins. Bees require both nectar and pollen as food sources throughout their life cycle. In contrast, adult monarch butterflies are floral generalists that only require energy-rich nectar from the diversity of flowers they visit. These butterflies convert the nectar sugars to body fat that sustains them during migration and through the winter when many flowering plants are in winter dormancy. Scientists note that nectar sources are particularly important during late summer and fall as monarchs migrate to overwintering sites. There are about 20,000 butterfly species around the world, and these are outnumbered by more than 150,000 species of moths. Some minor moths are as small as the thickness of a coin, less than 1/8 inch from wingtip to wingtip. Others are as large as birds, like the atlas moth that measures 1 foot across. Some members of each group are remarkably colored or patterned, while many are camouflaged. Some moths also need nectar to survive and thrive. Like all insects, every butterfly or moth has 6 legs, a head, and a body in 2 parts, the thorax and abdomen. Butterflies and moths also have 2 wings, feelers or antennae, big eyes, and a specialized tube-shaped feeding organ called a proboscis. Most butterflies have small knobs on the end of their feelers, and moths do not. In fact, many moths have antennae that are very feathery in shape. These antennae are for smelling and feeling. Many moths do not have a proboscis because as adults, they survive on energy they stored when they were caterpillars. At rest, most butterflies fold their wings up, while moths rest with their wings flat. Butterflies and moths can taste, smell, and see, but not in the ways humans can. We taste with our tongues, while butterflies and many insects have taste sensors in their feet. We smell with our nose, but male moths smell the airborne chemical signals from female moths through their feathery antennae, which have smell sensory organs all over their surface. We see with our single-lensed eyes, while butterflies have compound eyes so they can see in many directions at once. But apparently these creatures cannot see as clearly as we can see. Most butterflies spend the night in a quiet spot to avoid predators, and may be found sunning themselves during the day. Many night-flying moths are dark and have camouflage patterns, so they are also more difficult for predators to find at all times. The wings of butterflies are covered with thousands of tiny colored scales, all of which overlap like roof tiles to create the patterns we can see on the wing. Some butterflies have very few scales on their wings, so are clear and are very difficult for predators and humans to see. Some moths, like Promethea moths, have large eyes on their hind wings to scare predators. Butterflies, moths, and their caterpillars spend so much time hiding from enemies that, among the thousands of species, we can find one shaped like leaves, sticks, bird scat, bees, snakes, or dead leaves. Among all this great variety, perhaps the most recognized species is the monarch butterfly, a North American icon of insect beauty and migration. There is a well-known population of East Coast monarchs. These beautiful butterflies begin their journey in springtime from the mountains of Mexico, flying to the northeast, following the different species of milkweed, only to return to Mexico to overwinter sometime in October. They fly hundreds of miles to get back to Mexico in the fall. Although these beautiful creatures are well recognized and much beloved, their long-term fate is uncertain. Currently, less than 1/10 of the historical population remains. Every monarch butterfly, in fact, every butterfly or moth, begins life as an egg. A tiny larva, we call it a caterpillar, hatches from the egg and begins eating preferred food plants. For monarch caterpillars, these preferred food plants are milkweeds that produce cardiac glycosides, which confer chemical protection on the creatures even into adulthood through the presence of residual toxic biochemicals in the insect body that do not harm the insect but harm potential predators. After it grows through larval stages or instars, the caterpillar turns into a pupa. We call it a chrysalis, where the amazing changes of metamorphosis occur. Metamorphosis means growing and changing, and it's characterized by dramatic transformations of creatures from one life stage into another. The earliest insects did not metamorphose. They hatched from eggs and looked like miniature adults. Some insects still have this simple life stage transition today. About 280 or 300 million years ago, some insects developed a different way to mature from egg to adult, and the young and old insects of these species were using different resources through their different life stages. Today, 65% of all animal species that have this adaptation are insects. In many insects, metamorphosis is associated with the evolution of wings, which are restricted to the adult reproductive stage of the creature. Adult insects have become mating and dispersal stages for insect species that possess flight. Clumsy-looking caterpillars that eat leaves and turn into beautiful flying butterflies, and mealworms that eat leaf litter and turn into adult beetles that can fly, are examples of this wonder of nature. Let's look at what happens during this biological process of change. A plant-dwelling caterpillar has specialized mouthparts for chewing plant leaves and many pseudolegs for walking. Then develops a cocoon, and there changes into a butterfly with wings for elegant flight and a curled siphon-like proboscis that helps it suck up its sugary liquid nectar diet. These are seriously amazing changes in body shape, habits, and physiology from one life stage to the next. Insects like butterflies, beetles, and bees have complete metamorphosis, during which they pass through 4 life stages: egg, larva, pupa, that's the chrysalis stage, and adult. Other insects, like dragonflies and grasshoppers, go through transformations that scientists call incomplete metamorphosis. This is a 3 life stage process of egg, nymph, and reproductive adult, with no pupal stage. Instead of forming a chrysalis, the young gradually become adults through a series of molts. Metamorphosis in monarchs and other butterflies or moths ends as the creature breaks out of the protective chrysalis and a beautiful adult emerges. This amazing new monarch needs to breathe and stretch its new wings before it can fly and find mates to create the next generation of its species. To do this, its mouthparts also change so the adult can feed on the nectar of many different kinds of wildflowers. And while feeding on nectar, the monarchs contribute to Earth's environmental health by pollinating wildflowers, mostly those like lilacs that provide flower clusters that are open during the day and have surfaces that support the monarch's tiny feet. Interactions between flowering plants and pollinators occur on many ecological levels. The disappearance of beautiful butterflies has more implications than simply loss of color in nature around us. Habitats around the world are disappearing, impoverishing the environment for animals and people. As I've said a few times already, a big part of the work of zoos is conservation. That not only includes the conservation of the large animals you might associate with zoos, like pandas and lions and elephants, it also includes these small pollinator invertebrates near the base of the so-called trophic pyramid, what most of us call the food chain or food web. One of the Smithsonian scientists engaged in the conservation of pollinators is Donna Stockton, an entomologist and animal keeper at the Smithsonian's National Zoo in Washington, D.C. We're going to talk to Donna now about the Smithsonian's work in pollinator conservation. Hi, Donna. Are you there?
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. I'm hoping you can tell us first about the major threats to pollinator species.
Threats that pollinators face today generally have to do with unawareness on a large scale. We're very aware with key animals such as the honeybee. When that went down, everybody started, wondering what was going on. But a lot of people just didn't think to take a look in their own backyards about maybe what they were planting or using and what kind of pesticides they were using to grow their finely manicured lawn, that maybe they were affecting the other animals that live there. So they would go to the plant store, buy things that were pretty, that made beautiful flowers, and think that they were doing a great thing for the environment, but they maybe weren't aware that those flowers being hybridized didn't produce the pollen or nectar that these animals needed, or in fact came with pesticides that could be harmful to native animals that were trying to thrive in their yard. So overall, a lot of people think on a large scale, the strawberries here, the whatever there are being wiped out by large monocultured planting systems, but they can also be having a harmful impact right in their own backyard. So large-scale orchards, farming areas, that kind of thing, can change a local landscape just for the mere fact that they're being there.
What about the pesticides that we use on these plants?
We have to take into account what goes down the drain. A lot of people, just rinse their cars and rinse everything, and everything goes right down the drain. And, a lot of the stuff will come back to affect our water systems and that kind of thing. I'm talking about pesticides and things that are pre-treated when you get them, like grass seed and that kind of thing. Let's say you put that on your lawn, you expect it to stay. It doesn't necessarily stay. It's going to leak over into something that maybe you didn't mean it to get covered in pesticide, and it will affect things that hibernate in our ground. I mean, we have cicadas, we have crane flies, we have mosquitoes, and believe it or not, to an extent, a lot of them do help pollinate things.
That's interesting. We think a lot about bees and pollination, maybe not so much about these other insect pollinators. What are some of the most important pollinators?
Beetles, flies, obviously the range of bees. There's about 400 in the Washington D.C. area, where most people only look at the honeybee kind of thing, but the bumblebees are big time pollinators on this side. Fireflies can be pollinators, but if you actually get up really close, you can see a beetle, like leaf beetles, all that kind of thing, that typically maybe eat the leaves, bore through it. By default, they are actually sometimes chewing through, allowing that plant to get the pollen where it needs to go, and then producing seed and that kind of thing. Surfaces are sticky, especially where their antennae are, especially where their legs are, up where the joints are, and some beetles are, very fuzzy. You think of them as smooth animals with the wing that covers, but the actual wing can be very fuzzy, and their feet can be very sticky. They are full of pollen covered in it, and they go from plant to plant. Butterflies typically sit on the flower and sticks their proboscis in there. So as pollinators, sure, they're pollinators, but are they great pollinators? No. Those flies and bees and beetles do a much better job.
So what can people do to help all these pollinating insects?
I think they can do so much. First, we need to stop with the big manicured lawns. Second, we have to have that not so knee-jerk reaction. Ant, for example, you're like freaking out, wipe out every ant that enters your house. They're coming in for a reason or not. Ants are very clean. So do we need to treat them with a pesticide, or maybe can we do something outside to prevent them from coming in? We need to have less of a knee-jerk reaction than using a spray or a chemical to navigate what we do. We also, we got to stop going with what might be pretty. Some of this stuff is not very pretty.
Meaning, not choosing our garden plants by how they look, but how good they are for the local pollinators. So we want native perennials in our gardens instead of the ornamental annuals, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, yes. When you have these smaller ornamental plants, it's a kind of easier thing to manipulate. When you have these big camellias and other things, it might be a little harder to think about in the landscape. You don't think about, I'm sure horticulturists are like, yeah, you have to think about the acid and this and that and the shade and all this other stuff for the plant itself. A lot of people probably maybe don't have that ideal yard that can handle everything. There's an argument with butterfly bush. It's not native, but it actually attracts pollinators. So, there has to be a balance and that kind of thing of what you plant.
Thank you so much, Donna. This has been great. I think what we need to take away from all this stuff about plants and pollinators is pollinators and pollinator habitats have intrinsic value as ambassadors for the conservation of all invertebrates. They have aesthetic values for human art and culture. They have educational value to teach kids about plant and animal life cycles. Pollinators are indicators of healthy ecosystems that will allow human life on Earth to continue. At a broad landscape scale, the abundance and diversity of insect pollinators are positively correlated with overall plant species diversity. At the species scale, some flowering plant species support a huge variety of insect pollinators, and this may depend on whether pollinators are generalists or specialists. An executive memorandum by President Barack Obama, issued in June 2014, directed federal agencies to develop strategies, define research priorities, build conservation frameworks, and implement best management practices to promote the health of honeybees, monarch butterflies, and other pollinators like native bees, beetles, and butterflies. Global action is needed for pollinators that are now declining around the world because of loss of habitat, pollution, overuse of pesticides, and invasive species. Consumers should use products that are pollinator friendly, and people can contact their elected representatives and other policymakers and teach about pollinators so these policymakers have an appreciation for the essential role our pollinators play in the world's environment for ecological health and human food production. An interesting fact for you to discover might be the number of native flowering plants and pollinators in your area and how you can help them thrive. If you don't have enough gardening at home, try volunteering for a local zoo, park, or natural area that has wildlife-friendly gardens and build your legacy of a healthy environment for future generations from there.